It's hard for me not to smile being here. Probably easier for you. I was flying in to Midway last night on a plane. I wasn't, and the guy I started talking to the guy sitting next to me, and he was a Christian. He was really excited to hear that I was a Christian. And I told him I was going to be speaking in chapel at Wheaton College today. And he said, well then, man, you got to bring the fire. He said, no, I'm serious. You got to bring the fire. And I said, well, I'm a college professor, actually. I don't do fire. But then I started, thinking, Lord, did you put him here next to me? Should I tear up everything that I was going to say and bring the fire if I can figure out what the fire is? and that's it's sort of like the vocation question, right? Lord, do you have a word for me here? Are you pointing me in a direction? Are you telling me something, that I need to know? What is your will for me? There's a man named Bruce Waltke who taught Old Testament at Regent College in Vancouver for many, many years. And he would often have students come to him and say, I'm trying to discern the will of God for my life. What is God's will for me? And Bruce's answer was always a question. Why do you want to know? What do you mean, why do I want to know? And he said, no, why do you want to know? And invariably, people would say something like, well, I want to know what God's will is for me so that I'll make the right choices. And he would say, what's a right choice? What makes a choice right? And often, as this kind of line of questioning went on, what it would ultimately result in is a kind of an admission on the part of the people that he was talking to that the right choice was the choice that made them successful, and made them successful in a way that they sort of already understood success. And Bruce would not at that point tell them God doesn't want you to be a success or anything like that, but he did suggest a different way of thinking about it. What he said was that if you read Scripture, the people who seek to know the will of God for their lives are either doubters or pagans. He ended up writing a book about this called Finding the Will of God, a Pagan Notion. He says this is what pagans do. It's like divination, that we want to find out exactly what it is that God's will is. He's not going to tell us, he's hiding it from us, but if we guess right, we're going to be really blessed. But if we guess wrong, then we're in a heap of trouble. I think what Bruce really wanted people to think about is, what sort of God is this that you are worshiping? What sort of God is this who kind of holds out? He's like a God who runs a kind of a scam, I've got blessing for you in this hand, and I've got curse for you in this hand. And you've got to guess which one is the right one. And if you guess wrong, you're going to be cursed. And I think that is not the God that we worship. I made a big decision 6 years ago, and that decision was to leave Wheaton after 29 years and go to teach in the Republic of Texas. And if you ask, and I'm going to talk to you from the experience of someone who has been trying to follow Jesus for about 40 years now. And if you ask me, did I make the right choice? I'm going to tell you that I don't even know what that question means anymore. I don't know what that question means anymore. Because I made that decision believing, trusting that if I went to Baylor, that God would use me, that he would teach me, and that he would bless me. And if I decided to stay at Wheaton, then God would use me, he would teach me, and he would bless me. Either way, I'm not putting myself somewhere beyond the reach of the blessing of a gracious and ever-forgiving God. And I think seeing it that way, took me a while to get to the point of seeing things in that way, but I think that my experience taught me very slowly over a long period of time about that. And what it taught me, what my experience taught me, I learned here. So I'm going to do this kind of old dude reminiscing nostalgically thing now. So you're just going to have to deal with it. I do think it's relevant. So I did not grow up in a Christian home. If you had asked us, anybody in my family, are you Christians? I'm not sure anybody would have known what the question meant. However, if you had asked, are you Baptists? They would have said, darn right, we're Baptists. So we sort of knew that. But we didn't go to church or anything, but we knew that we were Baptists. So, and I really became a Christian. I started walking with Jesus for the first time when I was in college, and I met a woman that totally knocked me out, and that means emotionally, not like, and she wasn't doing the missionary dating thing or anything like that, but she was, it was really clear that she was serious about her faith, and then if I wasn't serious about my faith, then I probably wasn't going to get anywhere. And so I thought, well, then I guess I better get serious about my faith. As soon as I have one, I'm going to get serious about it. So I had this idea that, like, I don't know, I had this idea that the book of Romans was like a really important book. And so I wanted to be able to do things like say, boy, that Romans 8, that's really something, isn't it? That was my idea of a kind of a come on line, for... But I started reading the book of Romans, and I got to chapter 7. And at chapter 7, Paul says, what I would do, I don't do. What I wouldn't do, I do. What a mess I am. And I thought, that is me all over. That is exactly who I am. And I really did feel that Romans 7 was a kind of a prescription, or a diagnosis. And then Romans 8, what shall separate us from the love of Christ? Who will rescue me from this body of death? That was the diagnosis. That was the prescription, sorry. Romans 7 is the prescription. Romans 8 is the diagnosis. And I thought, well, if he understands me so well, then maybe his diagnosis is one, his prescription is one that I should take seriously too. And that was really how my life as a Christian began. Also, that woman that I was trying to impress will be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary next year, so. It's one of the reasons why, people worry about their motives a lot. I don't really worry about that. God doesn't really care about your motives, He just got bigger fish to fry. So I finished college, we got married, went to grad school, and when I was in grad school, I started feeling really, in so many ways, hamstrung and limited. I wanted to speak out about my faith. I wanted to be able to think from within this growing faith of mine. And I couldn't because I was at a public university, University of Virginia. I remember so vividly talking to friends. I mean, one of my friends who we all taught the first year English composition course, and one of them was like a really committed Marxist, and she was like organizing her classes in order to kind of win people over to Marxism. And then I had another student, another friend who was equally committed to feminism, and he was sort of organizing his classes in order to make everybody a feminist. Actually, none of us really believed he was serious about that. We just thought he thought that was a way to get women interested in him, was pretending to be a feminist. But that was his thing. And he could do that. I mean, they could be incredibly forthright, but if I had gone into the classroom and said, I believe that Jesus is Lord, and I'm going to teach you from that point of view, then I would have been fired. I would have been kicked out. I couldn't do it. And I started to feel increasingly constrained. And I knew that there were such things as Christian colleges, but I didn't really know anything about them. So I ended up hearing a lecture from a guy at Gordon Conwell Seminary, which I thought was the same at Gordon College, and it kind of is and kind of isn't. And he put me in touch with somebody there who put me in touch with the chair of the English department at Wheaton, the late and much lamented Beatrice Batson. God bless her, because she told me, first, don't have a job for you, but I'm going to keep your letter on file because you seem like an interesting guy. And then as I was going into the year when I was going to be really working on my dissertation, I got a phone call from Beatrice Batson because someone who had been signed up to teach a one-year appointment here said, I'm not coming. And there was nobody to teach his classes. And she said, would you be willing to come? And I had to be in Wheaton in 2 weeks. And I had just signed a lease on an apartment. And they said, we can't undo your lease. And so my wife and I just sort of flung ourselves to our knees in prayer, like, is this what we're supposed to do? Is this God's will for us, is how we would have put it at the time, I'm sure. And we decided, well, I've been asking about this, I've been praying about this, I think I have to do it. So we said, yes, we're going to come. And then like the next day, we got a sublet for our apartment. And we came, and I said, I'm just going to come here for a year. That's all I got is a one-year appointment. I'm going to come to Wheaton for a year, and I'm going to find out what teaching at a Christian college is all about. And 1 year turned into 2. Had another one-year contract. I had a third one-year contract. In that third one-year contract, I started teaching literature for the first time, and I thought I had been doing just the composition courses, and it was so exciting, it was so thrilling to me, and I loved doing it. I knew that this was a place that was working for me, but I still just had the one-year contracts, one more, a fourth one, and then finally I was hired permanently, and I stayed 29 years. I never saw anything more than just ahead, right? God did not give it to me to see more than what my next step would be. And so I had to just take that one step at a time. And there were a lot of things going on then that I didn't realize at the time, but looking back, I can now see it. And there's something that happened to me in my third year teaching at Wheaton, in the very first literature course I ever taught, that I did not see the importance of at the time, but I now see as one of the most important moments in my entire life. I don't remember what we were working on that day, don't remember what I was teaching. I don't remember the question that this student asked. I don't remember this student's name. There were like 50 students in that class, or 60. I just remember he had dark hair, and he was a little older than most students, or he looked older than most students. And he asked me a theological question. That's all I remember, is that it was a kind of a problem of evil question or something like that. And basically what I had was a kind of really bad Sunday school answer to that question. And that's the answer that I gave. And the thing that I will never forget as long as I live is the look on that guy's face. Because the look was a very expressive look, and basically what I read in it was this: oh, I expected something better from you. And I walked away from that thinking, I don't ever want to see a student look at me that way again. I don't ever want to see someone look at me that way. I've got to raise my game. I've got to do better. And the first thing I did was to go into the office of my first really great friend at Wheaton, Professor Roger Lundeen, and I asked him for help because I knew that he had done a master's in theology before he had done his PhD in English, and I said, I got to get up to speed. You've got to give me things to read. And then after that, I went upstairs to the 4th floor of Blanchard, a very different place in those days. And I talked to another friend of mine, Mark Knoll. And I said, Mark, you've got to help me and give me things to read. Those guys were incredibly patient with me. They would give me things to read, and they would sit and talk with me, and I just worked and worked and worked because I didn't want to let my students down. And the reason I didn't want to let the students down was because I knew that that guy was asking because he wanted to know. He wasn't asking because he was trying to catch me up in something. He wanted to know. And I had to do better by him. I had to do better by all of my students. And, I tell people all the time how much I loved teaching here. And I loved teaching here. And people would say, well, are Wheaton students, are they really that great? And I say, yeah, they're pretty great, actually. But then they say, well, what is it? What is it that makes them so great? And it took me a long time to figure out what that is. But I finally settled on this, is I felt like every day I came across students at Wheaton who were willing to be changed by what we did in class, if I gave them something worthy of that change. And I hope you guys are still like that. I hope if you're not, that you'll become that way, because that was the making of me, right? It was my response to students who were willing to be changed if I gave them something that was worthy of their attention. That was the thing that made me. I remember in my 4th year, I finally got to teach a senior level class. It was a class in literary theory, and I worked and worked and worked to try to get ready for this class. And that was such a confirming, affirming moment for me, because I felt like I was working with this incredibly difficult material, and yet, I was doing it in a way that I could deal with the questions that my students brought. I remember one student in particular in that class. He was a senior, super bright, but very skeptical of all the stuff that we were reading. And he put some of the hardest questions to me. And I felt like I was able to do them in such a way that though he didn't like the material, he liked the class. Because I had tried and made a really, really serious effort to deal with the powerful questions that he brought to me. That student I do remember about, but I actually remember his name. It's Philip Wheaton. I've often wondered whatever became of him. Had a lot of promise, I thought. Needed a little bit of an attitude adjustment. But overall, so I ended up after this, staying at Wheaton. I began to write a lot, and that's the thing that people know me for now, is all the books that I've written. But it's really only in recent years that I have begun to see that my response to my students, my desire not to let you down, my desire to do what I have to do, including spending a lot of time on my knees praying for God to give me strength and wisdom, that all of that was foundational to everything that I did after that. It's only in recent years that I've begun to see that all of my writing actually grew out of my teaching. And that if I hadn't taught here at Wheaton, I would not have become the kind of writer that I've become. I would not have produced the kind of books that I've produced. It all grew out of my attempt to answer your questions and to meet your concerns and to help you when you needed help from me and to share with you in this common enterprise of liberal learning. That has done everything for me, but I didn't see that until maybe I started seeing it after I left Wheaton. And I say that, I tell you all of these stories because I think that that's kind of how vocation works. you see what it is at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day. That is, it would be really, really gratifying if we could see laid out before us a path, a vocational path, and that all we have to do is just follow that path, and then we're good. Everything is great. But that's not how it was for me. And I really understand my vocation only now that I'm in my 60s. In a way that I never did before. What did I understand before? Well, one of my pastors when I was here in Wheaton, Martin Johnson of All Souls Anglican, Martin was telling in a sermon one day, he was talking about when he was a teenager in Vancouver, British Columbia, and prone in those days to what he calls his Nordic gloom, or his Celtic twilight. And he would get agitated and upset and anxious, and he would go out for a walk in the woods. But Martin being Martin, he would go for this walk in the woods at 2 a.m. So he's out there in the British Columbia forests, and he would have a flashlight, and he said that if I turned off the flashlight, I could actually see a bit of the world around me. But I couldn't see what was under my feet. And I would trip over a root or a stone and fall flat on my face. But if I turned on the flashlight, I could see where to take my next step safely. I just couldn't see the bigger picture. I couldn't see what was going on all around me and all about. I wanted to have that big picture. But really the only thing that I could do is to look down and see where to take my next step. When the psalmist says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path," that's the kind of light. It's the one that gives you security in taking that next step. But it's going to be hard for you to know what the next 50 steps are. And that is why when we do walk, we walk by faith. You can lay your plans. Maybe some of them will come true. Maybe none of them will come true. I can guarantee you that not all of them will come true. And it may very well be that what your real vocation has been is something that is going to become clear to you after you've been walking that path. After you walk through the night, and then as the dawn rises and you start getting the light around you, you begin to be able to see where it is that you have come. And then the grace of God that has carried you along that path will be manifest to you. That is certainly how it has been for me, but I never knew where I was going more than the first step. I never, ever knew. But God always called me to that next step. So this is what I want you to think about, what I want you to consider. I want you to think about the fact that you will have to walk by faith, that you may not understand what that path is until late in the game, but that God is faithful, and you don't have to worry about Him being the sort of God who will punish you for making the wrong choice. Wherever you go and whatever you do, He will be able to teach you, to make you useful to others, and to bless you. And in that way, He will demonstrate His faithfulness. So what I would like to do now is to close with a prayer. I'm going to borrow a prayer from Scripture because it has been the prayer of my life, and I hope that it will be one that is meaningful to you. So would you bow your heads, please? Dear Lord, your apostle speaks a word which I claim for all of us. In his letter to the Philippians, he says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God, and the peace of God, that passes all understanding will keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Amen.